Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. It was just another regular Tuesday evening when my whole world got turned upside down in an instant. I'd worked a long 10-hour shift at the factory and was driving home in my reliable old sedan. The radio was on low and I absent-mindedly hummed along to the classic rock tunes, thinking about the leftover pasta waiting for me at home. As I approached an intersection on the outskirts of town, the traffic light overhead blinked to red. I eased my foot onto the brake pedal, slowing to a halt just behind the bold white line. A moment later, the neon glow shifted to green, and I automatically pressed the gas, rolling forward into the intersection. Out of nowhere, a sleek black sports car came screeching through the crossroads, its engine growling aggressively. I caught a blurry glimpse of a blonde woman behind the wheel, her eyes glazed over and movements sluggish. There was no time to react or swerve out of the way before the luxury vehicle plowed straight into the driver's side of my sedan with a horrific crunching of metal and shattering of glass. My car was shoved sideways by the tremendous impact, spinning across the asphalt until it collided harshly with a light post. The airbags exploded instantly, cushioning my head and body from smashing into the steering wheel and dashboard. For a few terrifying moments, all I saw was white as the bags rapidly deflated around me. When my vision finally cleared, I frantically patted myself down, checking for injuries. Thankfully, nothing seemed broken, though my left shoulder and arm ached fiercely. I tasted blood and realized my nose was gushing red down my face. Still in shock, I shakily reached for the door handle and pried myself out of the mangled wreck, nearly collapsing onto the hard pavement below. The cherry-red sports car was crumpled badly along the entire right side, wisps of acrid smoke seeping from beneath the mashed hood. The driver's door hung open loosely, and the blonde woman was stumbling around near the rear bumper, cursing loudly. Even in my rattled state, I could tell immediately that she was highly intoxicated. Her speech was horribly slurred, eyes bloodshot, and she reeked of alcohol and stale cigarette smoke. She kept poking angrily at the destroyed back end of her car, bemoaning the damage through foul words and sobbing hysterically. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances swarmed the scene, their flashing lights painting the intersection in an eerie glow. As the chaos unfolded around me, I sank down onto the curb, pressing a rag from my car against my bleeding nose. The drunk woman, who I later learned was named Karen, continued her profanity-laced tirade, refusing to cooperate with the officers and medics. Against their advice, I declined a trip to the ER, wanting nothing more than to go home and put this nightmare behind me. The cops took my statement and I was cleared to leave after promising to get my injuries checked in the morning. Karen, on the other hand, was hauled away in handcuffs, still screaming about her ruined sports car. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but sadly, that collision was only the beginning of a months-long legal battle with the unhinged Karen. The very next day, I received a letter from her lawyer stating their intent to sue me for damages to her precious vehicle. I was flabbergasted when I read the absolutely bogus accusations against me that I had run the red light and purposefully smashed into her car out of jealousy and spite over its value. There was zero mention of her intoxication or reckless driving in the document. Instead, it portrayed her as a completely innocent victim and me as a deranged, irresponsible criminal out for vengeance. I immediately called my insurance company and outlined the facts of the incident in detail. They assured me not to worry and that they would handle the spurious lawsuit. True to their word, my insurance legal team crafted an ironclad counter-lawsuit against Karen, providing police reports, accident scene photos, witness statements, and even security footage from a nearby gas station that proved without a doubt that she had caused the crash. I was relieved that the truth would prevail, but also wary about having to face her again in court. The trial date arrived after many long months of anxious waiting. I sat in the front row wearing my best suit while Karen sauntered in looking utterly unconcerned in a flashy designer outfit. As the proceedings commenced, Karen's lawyer tried every trick in the book to paint me as reckless and deceitful, while making Karen out to be a victim who had merely made an innocent mistake. But the evidence against her spoke for itself, and the judge saw right through the weak arguments. In the end, the court unanimously ruled in my favor, citing the definitive proof that Karen had broken numerous laws by driving while heavily intoxicated, running a red light at high speed and causing a serious accident through gross negligence. I was awarded a substantial settlement to cover my medical bills, lost wages, car repairs, and legal costs. Karen was found guilty on charges of drunk driving, reckless endangerment, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Her license was revoked for 5 years. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and received a massive fine that put a huge dent in her family's wealth. Walking out of the courthouse that day with justice finally served felt incredibly liberating. Karen's husband glared at me hatefully as I passed by, but I held my head high, refusing to show any weakness. The memory of almost losing my life because of her stupidity and entitlement will stay with me forever. Her lavish sports car could be fixed or replaced, but nothing could undo the trauma she inflicted through her despicable actions. I know some say money can't buy happiness, but with my settlement funds, I was able to get myself a dependable new car and still have plenty left over to pay off debts and treat myself for once. As for Karen, I hope her time behind bars gives her clarity and that she emerges a changed woman, willing to take responsibility for her behavior. Only time will tell if her punishment truly serves its purpose in the end. For now, I'm simply relieved to close this painful chapter and get back to living my life surrounded by people who truly care. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My best friend was married for 10 years with his ex for a total of 13 years. He was absolutely head over heels in love with her like I had never seen before, which I never understood due to her alcohol abuse. She would take it out on him, and when he'd be venting about it, he'd always fall back on, "It's not her, it's the illness." A very respectable and admirable stance on it. Last year, she asked for a divorce because after years of what I would call abuse, he had simply run out of gas. Her reasoning for asking for one? When she got fired for testing positive for weed, he wasn't empathetic enough. He admits he wasn't because it had come on the back of one of her drunken tirades, where she told him he was a piece of crap who was always trying to control her. All he ever tried to get her away from was booze for the way she treated him when she was drunk. It took him forever to move on from this, with the divorce following shortly after. Earlier this year, after thinking he was moving on, he calls me to come over, and he's in a bad way. I arrive, and he is absolutely fall-down drunk. He goes on to say that she didn't ask for a divorce for those reasons. She had really been cheating, with several other people. The next morning, when he's more coherent, I ask him how he knew. He was cleaning out the spare room and donating stuff he didn't need anymore. And when he went to clear an old tablet, she was still logged on, and all of the evidence was there. He gets upset and says he's going back to bed and asks me to lock up when I leave. Before I left, I looked at the tablet. After seeing what I saw, I wanted to find a way to get even with the horrible and conniving woman, so I took pictures of it all and left. When I got home, I started looking up information about these people. 2 of them were just normal guys. Whether they knew she was married or not, I don't know. But the third comes up as a registered sex offender still on probation for being such a disgusting pile of crap. And the address is listed as 123 Lane City State. Chomo knew that she was married. I immediately knew what I was going to do. Chomo didn't live at 123 Lane. Chomo was living with the conniving ex. She made regular posts about their time together. On top of that, she is an avid weed user and has several firearms because she enjoys sport shooting. So I go into the state's sex offender site and make a report of Chomo not actually living where he's registered and that he's living in a home with what he has no right to, being a convicted felon on parole. I include screenshots of the social media posts, and all to back it up. I was thinking little would happen, but an inconvenience to their lives. Boy, was I wrong. She broke her typical posts with nothing serious trend on social media yesterday. With this gem, my year can't get any worse. Chomo lost his job and I'm now facing eviction because I can't afford my rent. So I go on the state court system site to see if it's related, and yes it was. Chomo was rearrested. She clearly can't post bail or Chomo would be out. The job she took after being fired definitely can't support her lifestyle. So he's probably going back to prison or at least jail, and she's a breath away from being homeless. I don't know if I'd ever tell my best friend I was the one behind this, but he is definitely ecstatic to see a horrible woman and sewer rat get what they deserve. Part of me wants to put up the sex offender registration link, and that he's sitting in jail and say something to the effect of, "It's a little more than losing a job, but not wanting to make my best friend's life harder. I'll just let sleeping dogs lie. The next one is a petty revenge story. The events of this story take place during my teen years, ages 13. 17 when my mother and I moved into a new rental property. The details might be a bit patchy here, as I don't have a lot of good memories associated with this house, and I've done my best to forget about many of the events during those years. However, I do have one good memory of petty revenge I got one day on a neighbor. Just to give you a little backstory, my family had very limited funds at the time, and we had just used what little spare money we had on moving expenses. We couldn't afford to move again, so we didn't advocate for ourselves as much as we should have. Literally on the day we moved in, we turned on the radiator heaters and discovered that they couldn't be turned on due to a leak in the living room ceiling. The landlord was aware of this but wouldn't be fixing it and told us to buy a space heater to keep warm in winter. He also refused to fix the broken downstairs bathroom or replace the roof. He casually suggested that if we wanted the walls painted, we could buy paint and do it ourselves. We hadn't even asked about paint, he just volunteered that we could improve his house with our time and resources. Of course, we didn't want to do that. The worst thing he ever did was open our door one Saturday morning without notice or knocking, while we were still in our beds upstairs, and shout into our house that he was just checking in. This was a violation of our lease, and he left without telling us that he'd let our sick cat outside when he opened the door. Luckily, I found the little guy on a porch across the street later that day, but I was so mad at our landlord. This story isn't about horrible landlords, though. It's about our neighbors, Karen, around 40 years old female, and Ken, around 40 years old male. The backstory explains why we wanted nothing to do with our terrible landlord, and it just so happened that the day we moved in, Karen and Ken, who lived next door, told us that they were his friends, implying that they'd report anything they didn't like to him. It was hard to avoid Karen and Ken since we shared a front porch with them, row house, and they were true to their word. If our lawn got too shabby, Karen and Ken let him know. If our trash cans didn't have lids, Karen and Ken called the county to put violation stickers on them. If the rat inspector was in the neighborhood, they sent the inspector under our back porch. It was like walking on eggshells in our own home. Despite all this, or because of it, we tried to stay on good terms with these terrible neighbors for the first couple of years. We wouldn't say anything to Ken when he came into our yard for dandelion greens for his pet iguana without even asking for permission. Then, around the time I was 15 years old, Ken asked me if he could hire me for a job. He and his family would be going on a family vacation that winter, and he needed a dog walker for his daughter's dog. We agreed on a rate, I don't remember how much, and I walked his dog for him 3 times a day for 2 weeks, even when it snowed. The dog was elderly and didn't give me any trouble, but I could have done without the bad weather. My mother was very proud of me for taking the job, as she hoped this would be a fresh start with this family, and we'd get on better terms. Once Ken and his family returned from vacation, I gave him an update on his daughter's dog and told him how well behaved she'd been. I expected him to pay me, but he didn't say anything about money. Since I was a shy teenager, I went home without payment but asked him about it the next time I saw him. He said, "It's my daughter's dog. Ask her for your money." His daughter was a college student who wasn't even at home that much, but I couldn't force him to pay me, so I left again without payment. About a week later, I saw his daughter, probably home for the weekend from college, but she said she didn't have any money when I asked and said she'd tell her dad to pay me. Guess what happened the next time I asked him? He was angry this time and repeated what he'd said the first time, even when I mentioned asking his daughter. Yeah, I never got paid, and my mother and I were too scared to ask again. Looking back on this, I feel like they knew how intimidated we were by their relationship with our landlord. One call to him about us harassing them, and we'd be homeless. They knew we were terrified of them and that they'd never have to pay me for walking their dog. Yeah, they took advantage of a 15-year-old kid. Around this time, or maybe a year later, my mom had a conversation with Karen. Karen had actually been friendly recently. She took an artistic photo of our cat in our kitchen window, a black and white photo with interesting light going across the cat's face, which she gave to my mom since she thought it looked pretty. We thought the whole interaction was odd since Karen had admitted to hating cats in the past, but my mom accepted the photo like an olive branch. Then Karen mentioned a tree growing in our backyard. It was what we call in this area a trash tree. since it's a fast-growing variety. She said she was worried it was going to drop seeds into her yard and spread, but her brother could help us with it if we liked for $100. My mom considered it and thought it was a good price, so she agreed. Looking back on it, I know that our landlord probably should have been the one to pay for this. But my mom was worried he'd come to the house to cut it down himself, so she agreed to let Karen's brother do it. Over the course of 2 days, Karen's brother cut down the tree and hauled away the rubbish. When he sent us the bill, it was $300. When my mom asked about the price, he insisted that the job was bigger than he'd anticipated, which resulted in the 3 times the cost. He got angry about being questioned as well, so my mom cut him a check. This was the second time we'd felt taken advantage of by them. My mom was a single mother, struggling to make ends meet, and they knew this. $300 was a lot of money for us. They constantly reminded us of their relationship with our landlord, making sure to stand outside and chat with him for 30 minutes following our biannual inspections. On one particular visit, the landlord stared at our front yard, as if expecting it to be shabby, and said, "It looks good." I don't know what they were talking about, since he'd obviously been informed otherwise. No matter what we did, Karen and Ken hated us and wanted us gone, and they wouldn't stop mentioning any little thing they could to our landlord. At a certain point, around when I was 17 years old, we stopped making nice with them. No more cordial smiles and waves were exchanged on either side. On one particular day, my mom and I were gardening in the front yard. Ken, who was a little less hostile than his wife, greeted us as he opened his front door. He left it open as he was painting and walked away. And here comes the revenge. Our neighborhood had a bit of a feral cat problem. We had been feeding the cats, which Ken and Karen in particular viewed as vermin. Perhaps that's why they hated us. My mom was friends with another woman in the neighborhood who was helping to catch and fix the cats. One cat in particular that hung out in our yard was gray and less than a year old. I'll call her Jillian for the purpose of this story. Jillian usually stuck to the backyard, which is why I was surprised to see her in the front yard while gardening. She was a feral cat who had never been inside a house in her whole life. So I was shocked to see her sniffing around Ken's open front door. I didn't expect her to go into their house, but I didn't discourage her. And inside she went. I started laughing, picturing the look on Karen's face when she saw a cat in her house. I love cats, so if I had been a little older, I probably would have kept Jillian away from those people to protect her. But as a teenager, all I could think of was the satisfaction of getting sweet, petty revenge on Karen and her husband after all the years of grief they'd put us through. And then I heard it, that shrill scream and running footsteps. I did my best to stifle my laughter, knowing what had happened. Karen was facing her worst nightmare, a small, fluffy adolescent kitten. My conscience was eating at me a bit because I didn't know what those people would do to Jillian, and also maybe I could get a closer look. I knocked on the ajar door and asked if everything was okay since I'd heard a scream. Ken told me there was a cat in his house and asked if it was mine, even though he knows we had inside cats only. I told him it was a feral cat who'd never been handled, but I volunteered assistance catching her. Ken led me upstairs where I saw it, that sweet, sweet pro-revenge. Ken said the cat was in the bathroom, and as I walked down the hallway, Karen peeked around a door, perhaps wondering who her husband was talking to. Then she looked back at the bathroom, eyes wide and wild, and let out another shriek. I was looking at a grown woman in her 40s screaming at a little cat like it was a rat. I don't know how I didn't laugh again in her face as she slammed the bedroom door to hide, but I'll never forget the look on her face. It was so worth it. With Ken behind me, I went into his bathroom. The cat was climbing the shower curtain, and I didn't blame Jillian for being scared. I was scared of Karen, too. She let me hold her under the armpits away from my body and didn't bite or scratch as I lifted her off the shower curtain and carried her out of the house to be released back into the yard. Ken thanked me, but he gave me a suspicious look like he thought the cat might have been mine since she didn't attack me. But I didn't care about his unvoiced suspicion. I'd gotten to see his ridiculous wife acting like an elephant who was spooked by a mouse. Things didn't improve with those neighbors. Not that we'd expected them to. They even complained a year later when we moved about how much space our moving van took up on the day we finally got out of that house. I adopted Jillian and took her with me when I moved. I still own her today, and she's no longer feral. Sometimes I pet her and think about that revenge she helped me get on Karen. I know it was a small payback on those people, but the real win was finally getting away from them. The next one is a malicious compliance story. So yesterday, my husband and I were at Target with our 5-year-old daughter. My old vacuum broke, so we went for a new one. My husband, being the smartass he is, placed the new one in the cart and said, "Happy Mother." I just laughed at this. Then this woman came out of nowhere yelling at my husband, saying that he's a horrible man and a terrible father for giving me such a sexist gift. I've had my run-ins with Karens before, but the fact she was yelling in front of my daughter and verbally attacking my husband that way, I was about to lose my temper on her when my sweet daughter looked at me and loudly said, "Mommy, I think she needs a time out." The Karen went bright red and quickly walked away. My husband and I started laughing our butts off. Bless a child's innocence. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.